With the failure of Cyberpunk 2077 to garner the lasting success it hoped to achieve, the door has been left open for other cyberpunk-themed games to grasp the undivided attention of gamers eager to lose themselves in a dystopian, fluorescent future. Just recently, we saw the successful launch of the Ascent, and now we get Foreclosed, a cyberpunk-themed, narrative-driven action-adventure. To be clear, this game is not Cyberpunk 2077, nor is it trying to be. It's not attempting to redefine a genre, and it doesn't aim to keep you busy for weeks on end. But is it any good? Is this the techno thriller you've been waiting for? I want to thank Merge Games for providing a review code for the game, and with that out of the way, I hope you'll join me for my review of Foreclosed. Before we begin, I want to mention that I recently started another YouTube channel called Quest Mode Unscripted, where I talk about all things video games completely unscripted and off the cuff. You'll find impressions of games, opinions, hidden gem highlights, discussions, and more. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you'll find the link in the description. Now, let's take a look at Foreclosed. The story begins with you learning that your identity has been seized, or rather, foreclosed. See, in this world, people enjoy the benefits of cyberware implants, but at the cost of losing their identity to the corporation who manufactures their implants. Well, it just so happens that the corporation that makes your implants has gone bankrupt, and now the bank owns the rights to your identity. If that wasn't bad enough, a bunch of guns for hire are also trying to kill you because, well, apparently your cyberware implants are one of a kind and worth a mint on the black market. So yeah, it's a bad day. Without getting further into the details, I will say that the story does a good job of explaining how you of all people have the superhuman abilities you have, while simultaneously explaining why dozens of goons are literally after your head. To bring this story to life, the game employs a comic book style. Certain cutscenes and even some gameplay sequences are divided into separate panels, while dialogue appears in speech bubbles. I had no qualm with the cutscenes being treated this way, but it was sometimes distracting when gameplay scenes were separated into multiple sections. Controlling your character in one panel while a separate scene plays out in another just made me unsure of where to look. As you can see, the graphics themselves also have a stylized, illustrated look. This not only fits the comic book motif, but the cel-shaded characters and environments, colored in pastel pinks, violets, and beiges, make the world appear to exist in a perpetually smoggy sunset, which fits the cyberpunk theme perfectly. That said, there are times when the game takes a step a bit too far towards the surreal, but overall I felt the graphical style served the game well. However, one element of Foreclosed that holds the game back, at least from a storytelling perspective, is the uneven voice acting. On one hand, some acting, particularly by some of the peripheral characters, was actually quite good. But man oh man, the main character delivered lines in a way that was at times comically bad.
I had just lost my ride. There had to be another way out.
It honestly felt like the developers were intentionally going for a late-night B-movie feel. And heck, maybe they were. The amateur flavor at times added a certain cult classic charm to the game. Sound effects were also disappointing. Gunshots, for example, sounded like toys, and none of the action ever sounded as weighty or as crunchy as I would have liked. On the other hand, the music was actually pretty good, but it often clashed, and I mean hard, with that dang voice acting. Take a listen.
Once again, no easy way out.
As for gameplay, Foreclosed actually offers quite the diversity of gameplay styles. When the story isn't playing out in one of the comic book cutscenes I mentioned earlier, you'll either be exploring, fighting, or sneaking. When it comes to exploring, you'll visit a number of locations from an empty, laser-lit dance club to the upper levels of a corporate skyscraper to the grimy streets far below. For the most part, these areas are linear, a simple exercise in point A to point B. Though in order to sneak past the occasionally secured door or barricade, you might need to hack a few locks, sneak through a ventilation shaft, or solve a navigation puzzle or two. The areas aren't boring, but they're not challenging or overly interesting either. That said, in most areas, you will encounter the goons that want you dead. After the opening act, these encounters almost always result in a gunfight, but you actually start the game without a weapon, so you'll first have to stealth your way around. Thankfully, one of the first abilities you unlock lets you sneak up on enemies and take them out silently by overheating, then frying their cyberware implants. Now, I never encountered any rooms or areas that I could clear out entirely using this ability, but I could on occasion thin out a group of enemies enough to sneak past the rest, or pull out my pistol without being terribly outnumbered. As a stealth fan, this was refreshing for me, but one thing to note here, if you demand believable or realistic AI from your stealth games, you will not find it here. Should an enemy stumble upon the dead body of someone you took out silently? Nothing. No searching for you, nothing. At least not that I saw in my playthrough. You'll also run into several segments where you'll have to sneak past airborne police drones or machine gun turrets. Mostly this was rewarding, or at the very least, it offered a nice diversion, but it was during one of the stealth segments that I became frustrated with one of Foreclosed's more annoying features, the checkpoint system. It's not a huge deal, but the game doesn't let you save your game, so you're relegated to certain autosave checkpoints which can be pretty far apart. In the stealth section I mentioned, I had to sneak past 3 groups of drones while searching for a set of 9 locks to hack. If I hacked 8 locks only to get spotted before hacking the 9th, tough luck, I had to start over. I want to make clear that I had no problem with the stealth mechanics, they were fine, but stealth takes patience, and doing it over and over again without a quick save feature made it tedious. Okay, let's now talk about combat. Much of your time in Foreclosed will be spent embroiled in gunfights. In the early game, these firefights are basic, like really basic. You can take cover and unload round after round after round at some pretty spongy enemies. Headshots do significantly more damage, but other than that, there's really no strategy early on. It's just point, shoot, duck, repeat. Thankfully, things got much more interesting once I started leveling up and unlocking my abilities. You level up as you earn experience, either automatically by working your way through the story, or by finding these green data points in the environment that you can hack to actually download experience points. By the way, hacking and finding these points did add a nice bit of motivation to fully explore each area. Anyhow, make enough progress through the game or download enough data and you'll level up, which rewards you with points that you can spend to upgrade both your pistol and your cyberware. Pistol upgrades include bullets that explode on impact, bullets that can penetrate helmets and armor, and even bullets that curve to hit enemies. Then there are your cyberware upgrades, and this is where combat gets really interesting. An early ability provides you with a temporary shield, and later on you can levitate enemies, rendering them helpless while you blast them to bits. Another ability lets you slam enemies, or their shields, into the ground. You also have a telekinesis ability that's separate from your cyberware abilities. With the press of a button, you can pick up things like crates, fire extinguishers, and even full-on dumpsters, and then throw them at your enemies. If you played Control, it works basically in the same way as in that game, where you levitate items, then hurl them at enemies to do a ton of damage. This is particularly handy against armored or shielded enemies. Now, one thing to note on your abilities is that should you use them too much, they'll overheat your cyberware, rendering you unable to move and vulnerable to enemy attacks for a short time. This goes for cyberware abilities, telekinesis, and even firing your pistol once it's been upgraded. Again, this means you can't spam your abilities, but you also can't unload clip after clip after clip into enemies if you're packing a fully upgraded pistol. On the downside, this became slightly annoying against the game's more spongy enemies. Seriously, some of them seemed downright invulnerable to bullets. On the upside, the need to limit my fire did force me to employ a bit more strategy than in those early firefights. And that's the best part about Foreclosed. During the game's more elaborate firefights, all of which took place in the latter half of the game, things got surprisingly strategic. Enemies would come at me in such numbers that my upgraded pistol alone just didn't cut it. I would get killed, then on my next approach, I'd ask myself, Should I first shoot these enemies here, then use telekinesis to hurl a crate at this enemy here? Or should I use stealth first? Or maybe before I do anything, I should take out this enemy by hacking this explosive container. Yeah, I did mention earlier that you can hack doors and locks, but you can also hack certain devices like ATMs and fuel containers during combat, causing them to explode and damage nearby enemies. Anyhow, it was during these strategic combat encounters that Foreclosed was at its best. Now, with the combination of some cool cyberware-enabled abilities, telekinesis, stealth, and hacking, not to mention the upgrade system and some cool environments to explore, this game definitely has a lot going on. And while none of the game's systems or mechanics are amazing, they're all actually pretty average. They all combined to create an experience I actually enjoyed. I was never bored while playing Foreclosed. Problem is, and this is my biggest complaint, is that, well, the game is just too short. Now, I don't have a problem with short games at face value. Some of my favorite games have only lasted 3 or 4 hours, and Foreclosed is maybe just a little bit longer than that. But the problem here is the experience ended right as I was beginning to really grasp and enjoy the combat. If you're gonna pack a game with a combat system that allows for some decently engaging gunfights, well, give me more than just a few opportunities to take full advantage of that system. Not only that, but the same goes for the story. Like I said earlier, the story itself had a decent start, but it feels like just that, a start. Along with the fact that the combat just started to get going by the end of the game, Foreclosed felt like the prologue to a much deeper and longer narrative. I think the best way to put it is that despite the fact that I liked my time playing Foreclosed, and maybe even because I enjoyed it, I felt the experience was incomplete. It was like, right as I was starting to think that this game might be worth the asking price, well, that's when it ended, and whatever gameplay I was looking forward to after that, well, it just didn't exist. And lastly, the game does have a few bugs. I always save these for the end of my reviews because it is possible that these might get fixed in a day one patch or even sometime shortly after the game's release. In one instance, I was prevented from progressing past a particular corridor because my character would become frozen every time I would pass through. I was worried this might have been game-breaking, but thankfully quitting the game and restarting did fix the issue. Second, remember those green data links that let me download experience points? If I happened to download one or several of those, then die before I reached a checkpoint, well, not only did I lose the experience I gained from the download, but the data point didn't return. So I was out the experience and I couldn't get it back. This wasn't a huge deal because I did gain enough XP throughout the game to fully upgrade my abilities, but it was still pretty annoying. Ultimately, it's hard for me to recommend Foreclosed, at least at full price. The game's greatest strength, its combat, only gets good in the second half of the game, and even then you only get a few really satisfying combat encounters. The game just doesn't give you enough time to get your money's worth. And if I'm being honest, remember how I said the telekinesis mechanic borrows heavily from Control? Sure, Control doesn't have the same cyberpunk aesthetic, but if you want combat similar to what you'll experience in Foreclosed and you haven't played Control, well, just wait for that game to go on sale. And if you want a cyberpunk-themed game that offers gunplay and lets you upgrade your cyberware, it may sound weird to say, but just play Cyberpunk 2077 if you have a next-gen console or a PC that can handle it. That's not to say I wouldn't recommend Foreclosed to anybody. For gamers who've already played those two games and who crave a cyberpunk-themed experience, you'll get a good afternoon or evening of decent entertainment here. Just get ready for some cringeworthy voice acting and for the game to end before it reaches its potential. And with that, I want to thank you for watching this entire video. If you enjoyed it, give me a thumbs up, and if you didn't, give me a thumbs down. And if you want more content just like this, maybe subscribe or even check out my other YouTube channel, Quest Mode Unscripted, where I talk about all things video games completely unscripted and off the cuff. I also want to thank my Boss Mode patrons, Brock and Bare Knuckle Bob. If you'd like to support my channel on Patreon, you'll find the link in the description. And with that, I want to remind everyone to never stop questing.